soldiers during the Vietnam War abandoning their M16 rifles and preferring to use captured AK-47s were known even back in the times when the Internet was called ARPANET. However, stories about the weapon preferences of North Vietnamese soldiers and Viet Cong guerrillas somehow did not reach us. Meanwhile, the Vietnamese treated the AK-47 similarly to how the Americans treated the M16, they set it aside. Instead, they opted for what seemed to be morally outdated submachine guns, specifically the simplified local version of the PPSh-41. These weapons were modified to the desired condition from Soviet and Chinese PPSh-41s supplied to Vietnam. So, what was it about our AK-47, which was mostly known in its Chinese variant, that they didn't like? In the footage, where a slim American girl fires a PPSh-41, it is strikingly noticeable how the recoil affects her, even though she handles the weapon quite well, maintaining her aim. Similarly, the PPSh-41's recoil affected the small-statured Vietnamese marksman. In contrast, the recoil of the Chinese Type 56, which, unlike the AK-47, did not even have a muzzle compensator, made it impossible for the natives of Indochina to fire bursts from such a weapon. Nevertheless, not only in Indochina but also in Africa, they preferred the PPSh-41 over the AK-47. Even in the second volume of the third edition of the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, the first article was about Angola. During the time of its printing, Angola was still a Portuguese colony, but the struggle for its independence began as early as 1956 with the MPLA, Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, armed movement. Though initially offered the latest AK-47 rifles, the guerrillas decided otherwise. They saw no need for automatic carbines with a firing range of 1 kilometer in the jungle or savanna covered with tall grass, where enemies could not be spotted even a couple of hundred meters away. Both South Vietnamese and Angolan guerrillas favored the DP machine gun with the PPSh-41. It allowed for long bursts of fire, had a large ammunition capacity, and a high rate of fire. They also adapted it by setting the gas regulator to position 3. Intended for sustained fire from heavily fouled weapons. The Angolan guerrillas least favored the Trophy G3 rifle, which was used by Portuguese colonial troops and not even well liked by the Portuguese themselves. It was issued in limited quantities to Portuguese special units. The only alternative was the modified AR-10, which also used the same NATO ammunition. It was rare and reserved for Portuguese special forces. During the Nicaraguan Revolution in 1979, the Sandinista National Liberation Front (FSLN) won. But the resistance to the new government included not only the Sandinista Popular Army but also the militia units of the local population. While regular forces were armed with AK-47s, the militia received AKs as well as some PPSh-41s, mainly from Cuban revolutionary arsenals. Afghan fighters also loved the PPSh-41, even though they were not fighting in the jungle. In Afghanistan, there were areas covered with dense vegetation that reached the roads, and the PPSh-41 had been used since the times of King Zahir Shah when the Afghan Royal Army was mainly equipped with Soviet supplies. Later, during the existence of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, the militia was armed with the Afghan analog of the Nicaraguan Sandinista militias Sarandas. Recently, Americans unexpectedly discovered the PPSh-41 and were wildly enthusiastic about it. The main reasons for this enthusiasm were the ability to keep the weapon on target throughout the burst and the capability to fire 71 rounds in about 4 seconds. However, the PPSh-41 had a significant drawback in the form of the TT pistol cartridge it used, originating from the Mauser cartridge. It performed poorly against bulletproof vests, but this was a common issue for all traditional pistol bullets. Addressing this and other minor problems could give the PPSh-41 a new life, and an updated version could find its place in the 21st century Russian army. What specifically needs to be done for this? We'll talk about it in the next installment on this topic.